again to In the Living Room with Stephanie and myself, Sonia. Our topic today is on drug addiction and codependency. And our speaker is from New York, and he has had issues with such. His name is Scott Setnar, who is a Catholic and environmental science graduate who rose to the rank of project manager, battling codependency and substance abuse in a difficult marriage. His journey took a turn for the better, and today he is now a celebrated recovery leader at Victorious Life Christian Church in New York, dedicating nearly 8 years to helping others find their path to recovery. Join us now with Scott as he tells us the story of his journey.
Oh, Heavenly Father, thank you for today, and thank you for the time that you have given us, the most perfect earthly gift that you could give. And dear Lord, with this time, you have showered us with grace, mercy, and forgiveness. And Lord, it is all love. And thank you for today, for this, to share my testimony, and great thanks that to the people that may help touch in mind and heart. We ask this in your most blessed name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, well, the beginning. When I started to earnestly take recovery seriously, I had to look at my past. I had to start when I was a child. And it's important to do so, because that's where a lot of the foundation begins. And for me, I was born in a small country town called Galway, New York. My parents, we were very poor. We were the only family on one street. It wasn't even a road, and road. And so we were kind of sheltered from things. When my father cashed his check, he had $2 left per week for extra money. So we grew up very poor. Well, we grew up with a high degree of morality. We were go to church every Sunday, and we were always taught to the 10 Commandments, honor thy mother and thy father, think of yourself or think of others before you think of yourself, that type of upbringing. When I started kindergarten was when it really took hold of a lot of underlining issues. I had a kindergarten teacher that did not like me. And she used to beat me with a wooden paddle, probably about that thick, and it had holes drilled through it so that when she swung it, there was no air resistance. And so why she singled me out, I do not know, but henceforth, anyway, that's what it was. And I would be taken into a bathroom, which was connected to the classroom, where this would take place. And so all the other kids in the classroom could hear this.
Wow.
And so that led to a lot of fears in my life. And I've come to learn that when a child is born, there are two fears: fear of loud noises and fear of falling. Every other fear is a learned fear.
Yes.
So what I ended up happening to me was I ended up growing a fear of doing things wrong, repercussions, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of not being accepted or liked, fear of authority figures, fear of women, fear to be outgoing, fear of not fitting in or becoming outcasted,
Mm-hmm.
fear of saying things wrong or ridiculed, fear of making mistakes, fear of being hurt, either physically or at that point I didn't know, but emotionally uh, damaged.
Mm.
Fear of pain.
Wow.
So I would, and it led to a high degree of shyness. And when I would talk to others to try to become friends, I would embellish stories. There would be somewhat of a truth in there, but there would be an embellishment to trying to puff myself up to make somebody like me because I was so afraid that I wouldn't be liked because I was the kid that got beat.
Mm.
So why would I want to be friends with him? Because if I'm friends with him, then I'm next. So, um, so that's what ended up happening. And little did I realize the amount of damage that she did do.
Yes.
But at that young age, back in the, late 70s, you just suck it up and deal with it. And, all of that happened, I just took it, put it in a locker and took the key and threw it in the river, and just forgot about it. And so she had a major impact, but I didn't realize this until later in life. Then, as for my upbringing with my parents, my mother was the compassionate parent. My father was the critical parent. My father was a perfectionist, or is a perfectionist. Um, he was very critical. Anything that was done would be, "Hey, great job, Scott," but and then there would be, "I would have done it this way," or "I would have done it that way," or this, that, or the other thing. And that happened all the time. So I could never achieve or get validation,
Mm-hmm.
affirmation from him. I was always seeking that. And I've come to learn that it's not his fault necessarily at all. It's because that's how he was brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And so no two parents I had to learn are perfect. They're bubble just like myself.
Yes.
But what that did is it instilled a fear of failure because I had to try to be as perfect as I possibly could, which ultimately led me to be critical and a perfectionist as I grew up. And the funny thing about that is that I always told myself that I would never be like my dad, but I turned out to be just like him. As I was growing up, my father played semi-professional basketball. And when he met my mother and me being the firstborn, he wanted me to play basketball. I really didn't want to play basketball, and I had no desire to play basketball. But what did I do? I learned how to play basketball. So, and I fell in love with the sport. And however, as I was growing and going through school, my father got involved in the school sport, and he became a coach.
Ooh.
So I became the coach's kid.
Mm-hmm.
So with that degree of perfectionism, he held me to a higher standard than all the other players. And he expected more out of me than anything because of his own ego and pride that, my kid is not going to look bad on the court. And, so he always held me, pushed me harder, farther than any of the other kids. So all of that stuff had a major impact on my growing up in the way that I thought as I was going through life. When I started college, I went to college. I got an AS degree in math and science at a community college. There, I picked up smoking because I thought in order for me to fit in, I needed to do what everybody else was doing. And so that's what I did. I played basketball in college, and I transferred to SUNY Plattsburgh up in the northern part of New York and got my BS degree in environmental science. When I was up there, I had a girlfriend. She cheated on me. That was devastating because as I was going through my life, I never really had a lot of girlfriends because I had a fear of women. I had a fear of being rejected, stemming forth all the way from my kindergarten teacher. So as I look at things, I can see where all of this had started to come into play. During school, my mother had cancer. She came down with cancer twice, breast cancer. The first one was put into remission, and then she got a second one that was far more aggressive, which ultimately took her life. And so that was hard to do because I was in school and I had an option to either come home or stay up there. My parents wanted me to stay up there to finish my degree. And I was happy for that decision because I was afraid to go home because I didn't want to see my mother. I was afraid to see the death of the thing that I loved.
Yeah.
And see that degradation.
Mm.
So she died on January 1st of 2003. So at the age of 52, which I was very angry. Stopped going to church, wouldn't go to church, was angry at God for stealing my mother, from me. I thought that she needed to have more time here so that she could enjoy things in life with retirement with my father and everything like that. So I was very, very angry. Then at one point, after about a year, I cooled my jets and said to myself, who am I to make that judgment? It's his way. So, and there has to be a reason for it, and she's not suffering. So at that moment, I reconciled and I started going back to church. Post loss of my mother, I lived with my father for a period of time. I had moved back home to kind of help him a little bit. And during that time, I met this girl on the internet dating site, and we went on a few dates, and a few dates turned into more dates, but when I had met her, she told me that she was in recovery. I said, okay, that's great. I was a country kid. I knew nothing about drug addiction, substance abuse, any of that. So I said, hey, that's great. You're in recovery. That's perfect. And she was sober. She was, working the program as best she could. And during that time, for about 6 years, we had dated. And she had a couple relapses or whatever. And I would go to AA meetings with her or NA meetings with her as support. Finally, on April 9th in 2010, we got married. And where I was working at the time, I had medical coverage, but I did not have prescription coverage. And she was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, which is a very painful, bone-changing disease.
Yes.
And so I couldn't afford the medications. So in her thinking, she would self-medicate. So, and kept it from me for about a year. This is where codependency starts to take hold, where it's so silent, it's you have no idea that it's even happening.
Tell us a little, what is codependency?
Codependency is trying to control. Is self-sacrifice, sacrificing yourself for somebody else, but ultimately it comes down to control,
Yes.
and which equals pride. So control, power, pride. So feeling that I had to be I had to put the burden all on me, and I had to sacrifice everything for the betterment of her. She held it for me for about a year, but during that time, I'm feeling I'm losing control.
Mm-hmm.
Isolation starts, the lying starts, the manipulations are starting, bank accounts getting drained. I can't figure it out why. And finally, after about a year, she came forth and said this is what was going on. At this point, family dynamics were horrendous. Dysfunctional family. Her side of the family was extremely dysfunctional. Uh, and I'm putting this all on myself and trying to keep things together. And ultimately, it got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I could, me trying to change her and trying to control the situation. I couldn't do it. And ultimately, what ended up happening was I said, well, if you can't beat them, try them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I did.
Were there children involved?
There were, again, with a dysfunctional family, there was a father, but
you had to take on that responsibility.
I took on that responsibility for
yes,
a lot of years.
Okay.
And but it was always a struggle. It was always a struggle. So there were kids involved. There were other family members involved. It was probably the worst dysfunctional relationship I was ever witness to. And being from my family was not like that. So this was like a whole, lesson in dysfunction. And I didn't deal with it well. So, which ultimately, I made some very, very poor choices.
Yes.
Well, do you think our sympathy towards her and her children, although you loved her, because you wouldn't have gone in a relationship, but do you think it had a lot to do with more sympathy towards her?
There was sympathy, but it also came down to the point of enabling.
Okay.
And that was also another kind of like codependent thing where I'm trying to control that aspect of it too.
Yes.
Thinking that I'm helping when in actuality I'm actually hurting.
Okay.
So my addiction started. We were living in an apartment, and I started smoking crack.
Yeah.
And I never did a drug in 37 years.
Wow.
So started doing the crack, cocaine, and then that sends you off into a tizzy. And to be able to come down off of that, the word, they say come down off of, is because you're jumping out of your skin. And to do that, one way is to either consume alcohol, and I don't drink. The other way is to use heroin. And so I did. She introduced me to injecting heroin.
Okay.
For that. Couldn't make hotel pay or apartment payments, and ended up getting evicted. and we moved into a hotel. Um, Still working, still trying to put that one on.
Yeah.
And even though work kind of new, they kind of asked me because I was losing lots of weight, and they said, Scott, what are you doing? What are you on a diet or, what are you doing? I said, no, I'm going to the gym. I'm working out, trying to get, and, but I think they knew. And because of my pride and the fear of failure,
Yes.
it got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I called up one day and I talked to my secretary and I told her, I said, I'm not coming in. And I'm done. I'm not coming in. I quit. No 2-week notice, no nothing. Just I quit. And it's because I couldn't face the fact of being terminated or fired. And it was easier to bow out this way than to face that.
I guess at this time your attendance at work was not good.
Oh, I was at work. No, I would go to work.
Every day?
It was, but everything, yeah, it was just trying to balance work and that lifestyle or the beginning of that type of lifestyle, which is constantly drug seeking, was just too much. And one had to give. And so I made another poor choice to, instead of getting the help that I needed, I reverted backwards because of wanting to be with my spouse.
Yeah.
So, so I quit flat out. And
was it more to deal with pride? You, instead of them firing you, you left on your own terms. So there again, pride, presents itself.
oh, absolutely, pride backed by fear. It was a prideful thing on my part, selfish on my part to do so. But the underlining root of that was that I was afraid to be terminated. At that very moment, the streets became my life.
Okay.
And something that I was completely unfamiliar with, I knew nothing about. I was, really neck deep in history and in preserving American history. I had probably $80,000 worth of Civil War antiques. I sold all of those for crack and heroin.
Oh,
wow. Wow.
You were really deep.
I cashed in my 401k.
Wow.
I started to steal. And even though I was stealing, I knew that what I was doing was wrong. And every time that I would go into a establishment to steal, whether it would be food or clothing, I would always say, Lord, forgive me for what I'm about to do. I rented my car out for drugs, sold my car for crack and heroin. I got arrested for petty larceny for stealing food at a grocery store. And that led to, living on the streets for the first time, begging, manipulating, cheating, lying, moving from crack house to crack house, living on the streets, picking up cigarette butts off the sidewalks, asking people for some food, always hungry, always dirty, never knowing what's coming over your shoulder, whether it's a police officer or somebody trying to rob you, beat you. It's a very harsh environment. Ultimately, when I got arrested for petty larceny at the first time, I was allowed to go into recovery. I was allowed that option. So I took it. So my first rehab, I called this, I got this. Well, didn't get it the first time. I checked into Spark Gilliland for the 28-day inpatient program, and then I went from there. I went to the outpatient program for 6 months, and they were talking about things, about unmanageability, powerlessness, codependency, ignorance, justifications, and rationalizations, talking about selfishness and critical and judgmental and all of these words, and trying to figure out where they fit into me, And so because because of my pride, I would use knowledge as a weapon.
Mm.
Mm.
So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to learn it and I'm going to be perfect at it.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectionism.
Yes.
And over time, once I graduated from all of that, I never won. The recommendation was to get a sponsor, do the 12 steps, right? And build a sober network. I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't do the 12 steps. And I didn't build up a network. I didn't work the program. I'd still go to meetings. But over time, all of that negativity, all of those defects crept back in. All of those fears, nothing changed. My heart didn't change. My mind didn't change. So, which ultimately led to another relapse, or the first relapse. My wife started drinking, and the next thing I know, I'm driving to Schenectady to go get her crack cocaine.
Wow.
Little did I realize, I already knew when I got in the car what was going to happen. Before I even put the key in the ignition, I knew that me going there, I'm gonna do this. And I was very upset about that because I had about 2 years of sobriety under my belt.
Wow.
And
One question. So you and her were taking crack at the same time, at a point, or were you secretly doing?
Oh yeah. No, this whole time, whatever I explained to you, between relapse and actively being out on the streets, she was with me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife, we went back out again. So in other words, here I am trying to control a situation. Fear of losing her, fear of all those underlining fears, fear of losing her, fear of abandonment, fear, all of this stuff.
Yes.
I was working at the time for Catholic Charities, of which I was, for the first time in my life, I was terminated. When they tell you that each relapse gets worse,
Mm-hmm. It's true.
that's true. It's a true statement. You can take that to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
This one was much worse. I was out on the streets for another 6 to 8 months. Got arrested more times for petty larceny, in fact, numerous times. And with all of that, the physical, the emotional, spiritual, just complete degradation. Recovery is 3 things. It's physical, it's emotional, and it's spiritual.
Oh.
And so I lost another car. And the thing about it is then I ended up stealing for what they call boosting. They wanted, drug dealers liked me because I didn't fit the characteristics of a typical booster. And so I was able to get things that they wanted.
So
What's that?
What do you refer to as a booster?
A booster is somebody who steals.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay. And so they liked me because I could get things that other people couldn't get. And because I didn't fit the look.
Mm-hmm.
And So I would trade those items for drugs.
Yes.
Say. So ultimately, though, that caught up to me, and I ended up getting arrested again. And I spent 28 days at St. Mary's Hospital in Troy, inpatient, and then proceeded to go to an outpatient program. This time I did get a sponsor.
Oh, good.
I did half of a step one, and I'd still go to meetings.
Mm.
But during this time frame, of course, my wife is with all of this the entire time. I said, well, geez, maybe a geographic location would be better. Well, geographical changes don't work.
Mhm.
And because I may have changed the location, but I never changed
Inside.
Inside, yeah.
never changed how I thought.
Outlook, yes.
So ultimately, it was doomed to repeat itself. And so I fought it off. She relapsed again. And then I found myself driving from Gloversville to Albany, New York every day, which is about an hour and 10-minute ride in search of drugs.
Mm.
And all the meanwhile, having the kids were with their father, but we had dogs. There would be days where we weren't home for days, and then come back. It was really bad. And ultimately couldn't make the rent payments, were evicted out of there. And basically we were living out of our car with a dog, 2 dogs, and a cat.
Mm.
Um,
May I ask you something, Scott?
Sure.
With your background with the Catholic Church, did you ever think that maybe you could have gone there for help or?
Well, I could have thought to go to a million places for help, but I never went to any one of them because what ultimately happens is the fear.
Rejection?
Well, no, not so much the fear of rejection. Well, believe me, you get rejected enough when you try to get into a hospital and they don't take you.
Mhm.
But it's the fear of, especially with heroin, is the fear of withdrawal, the fear of having to suffer the pain and discomfort that goes with that. If in those that have suffered through withdrawals from that, ultimately no. But for those that don't, take the worst body aches and stomach ache, leg cramps that you could possibly imagine, and that would be heroin withdrawal, curled up in a ball,
Yes.
puking, all kinds. It's
Terrible.
it's horrible. So this last outing, I got assaulted on Quail Street, trying to protect her. I had my right jaw shattered and my right ankle. I was hospitalized for that. My mouth was wired shut. And when I was discharged from the hospital, I picked up right where I left off. I ended up meeting up with this guy. We had known him for a while, and he wanted me, because I had a vehicle, to go around and cut out catalytic converters from underneath vehicles because of the platinum and gold that are in the catalytic converters, and then sell them to the mechanic shops. I had always refused his advances on that. But when things come down to I finally said and agreed to do that. And I would drive him around and cut out catalytic converters. Thank God that wasn't a long lasting thing. We got caught pretty quick. But fortunately, how you look at it, I was arrested for that. But instead of petty larceny, it was considered grand larceny.
Ooh.
So when I was in jail, I was facing 1 1/3 to 3 years in prison, which to me was a death sentence.
Yeah.
So I was arrested. During that time, I found out that I had gotten hepatitis C from using dirty needles.
Mhm.
I also, because of that, I had, violated probation. So there was, consequence upon consequence upon consequence adding up. While I was incarcerated, I had metal frame glasses, which they took because they said that I could use it to stab somebody. So that I could not, and I'm legally blind without them. So
Oh boy.
I wasn't, I was blind, literally. And because my mouth was wired shut with the broken jaw, the only thing that they gave me to eat in jail was chicken broth and beef broth. So, while in jail, I lost over 100 pounds
Wow.
in jail. And when I was the first of the 18 to join what they call the sheriff's, it was called Spark program, and it was for those in jail for drugs. So I was one of the first ones to join that program. But I made a choice in jail that this was enough. They do give you some medications to help with that withdrawal, and you hit that rock bottom.
Yes.
And when a conscious decision is made, is because I had nowhere else to go. I had nothing else to give. I had nothing else that I could do other than in one direction. And I said, said a prayer like probably most do in jail is,
Good.
dear Lord, I would call it the foxhole, or, the foxhole prayer, dear Lord, get me out of this. And I swear I will change my life and this, that, and the other thing. And so, that prayer was said. And I basically advocated for myself and wrote letters to the Albany County Drug Court to get accepted into their 18-month program. I talked with Sister Phyllis through the Catholic Church, who was always working to get those with substance abuse help into programs. And ultimately, I was accepted into the Albany County Drug Court program under probation. And I had that was an 18-month program with 3 years of probation. It's all in how you look at it.
Yes.
And as I was looking at it, most people will look at it negatively.
Yes.
I got probation, I got this consequence, I got that consequence. But ultimately, I looked at it in a different way, that these people are here to help me.
That's right.
And so I accepted that and was going to use that in my ability to do this. So it started in jail, this recognizing that something needed to be done. So I went to AA meetings in jail, NA meetings in jail, Bible studies in jail.
Wow.
And then I was released. I got out and I went into the Father Young program here, which is for recovery. And while I was living there, they always put these recovery centers in the worst possible places. They're not put in great areas. And so within minutes of leaving the halfway house to go to a program, within moments, you were always solicited for drugs.
Yes.
Plus also seeing heroin bags, crack pipes, all that stuff was all over the place.
Yes.
So I had to mentally prepare myself every day when I was going to programs to be prepared for those things.
Plus a wife who was still within the habit, who was still
you're trying to
must have been tough.
Oh, very tough. It was because you were looking, you're fresh meat. You just came out of being incarcerated. Right. You're new. You got some. You're under your belt. You got some time a little bit of time under your belt. You're very weak because of where you just came from, emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
That's right.
And then be subjected to have to face these things on a daily basis to go to a program was a test.
Yes.
You
Must
know, a
have been
test
very
to
difficult.
be able to persevere through those things. I started going to AA meetings and NA meetings outside of, you know, the programs.
Mhm.
But then a friend of mine asked me to attend this program called Celebrate Recovery,
Okay.
which is a Christian-based 12-step program.
Well, it sees.
And I said, yeah, sure, I'll attend that. And so I did.
Mhm.
Being in recovery, and I've gone through, you know, 3 different outpatient programs and all this kind of stuff, you learn things.
Yeah.
And I learned that, of course, recovery, as well as with any life situation, are 3 things: physical, emotional, and spiritual. And I realized that the physical part, I can go to a doctor if I
Yes.
don't feel well. Emotionally, I can go to a therapist. I can get help in that general direction.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in recovery programs, the spiritual aspect is the thing that is most neglected because of too many beliefs, you know, in where I don't believe in that, or I believe in this and I don't believe in that. So spiritually, it was the most neglected aspect of recovery. But I also realized that it was also the most important.
Yes. But actually, wouldn't you agree that most churches don't know how to deal with issues of drug addiction? So all the time it has been the different health or mental health areas that dealt with it. But when that person has recovered to a certain point, I don't think that a lot of the churches are prepared to deal with somebody unless they have been through it themselves, like in your case, whereby you're now helping people, you know.
It's very difficult because of the stigma.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
stigma that follows somebody who suffers from substance abuse, which
Yes.
is just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the sin of the symptom. It's just a way for them to medicate themselves from the guilt and the shame and the pain of what they've experienced in their lives. And unfortunately, people aren't empathetic or
Yes.
understanding of where that person is coming from because they've already judged them.
That's it. That's it. That's
Um, So yeah, no, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that and accept, because I know even in my own church I wasn't accepted.
Mhm.
So it was not everybody, but there were those that
Yeah.
you were automatically labeled.
Yeah.
And so I went to Celebrate Recovery,
Mhm.
and I realized, I said, yeah, this is where I need to be. I need to be here. This is where I'm going to do this. And from that point on, I've been there for almost 8 years now. And but I started doing all the things that they suggested that I do
Mm.
when I got into recovery. If somebody tells me something about myself, I'm going to listen to them
Yeah.
because they're seeing something about me that I can't see for myself.
That's right.
And ultimately, um, when I went to my first rehab, my counselor told me, Scott, you're codependent. I said, what's codependency? She told me.
Hmm.
And I said, what do you mean? And I'm given every kind of justification and rationalization for my behavior. But I never listened to her because I was in denial of what it was. And, I proceeded to tell her to go to hell. I said, you can go to hell.
Okay.
But you know what? If I ever do see her again, I owe her
Apology.
an apology because she was absolutely correct. And so this third time around, And when I introduce myself in Celebrate Recovery, I always introduce myself as my name is Scott. I'm a faithful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with pride and fears, codependency, and substance abuse. Because I accepted it.
Okay.
What it was, because it's true. It
So
was true.
Scott, tell us a little bit on codependency. It's just in recent years that we have been using that term, even in mental health issue. So tell us exactly what is codependency?
Okay, this goes when I started doing the 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
My first 12-step study. I think I've done 6 or 7 of them. Of them, and it takes about a year to do. I started looking at the questions that Celebrate Recovery asks. It's a very structured program, and they ask us questions to guide you through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that in step 1, they asked you a lot of things about fear, and they asked you a lot of things about pride. Although maybe subtly, they may ask a question about pride or fear, but you got to look for other words as well, like anxiety or worry or ego or control. All went to power, all went to pride, pride and fear. So you ask me what codependency is. Codependency is just a big, long, fancy word for pride.
Okay.
Trying to control something that I have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to sacrifice myself for something, which ultimately is what I did. I sacrificed my life, basically. I know, because codependency almost killed me. It wasn't the heroin or the crack cocaine. That would have been just the means. If it was anything that would have killed me, it would have been codependency or my pride.
Because what I remember reading is that it's an extreme need for approval and recognition, a sense of guilt when asserting yourselves, and a need to control others. And you plan your life around the people, like it enables you to sacrifice yourself for them.
Sure.
So
Sure.
indeed, that was what you did with your wife.
Hands
And
down.
the other.
Hands down. Yeah, sure. Hands down. I mean, you can look at any definition of codependency.
Mm-hmm.
It's always, coming down to a sense of control, sacrificing yourself, looking to be esteemed, looking to be affirmed, looking for all of those things that I talked about prior as I was growing up as a kid. And it's just a big, like I said, it's just a big, for me, it's just a big, long, fancy word for pride.
Right.
And when I was going through Celebrate Recovery, as I'm going through the first year, I went in for 2 things when I went into Celebrate Recovery. I went in for substance abuse and codependency. I went in for 2 things. After my first stint, my first 12-step study, I realized I got a lot more issues than just those 2 things.
Wow.
And so then I liked it so much that I saw the fruit of what God was able to do for me and what he was able to show me about me, because he already knows who I am. It's this whole exercise is for me to know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did another one.
Yes.
And even more was revealed. I said, wow, this is fantastic. I said, I'm going to do another one. And I did.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't ready to hear that word pride or deal with certain fears.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
During that third time, I was ready to hear those things. And I took a deep dive into what that was and what did it mean. Why are these questions talking about anxiety and worries and fears and pride and all of these things? And I started looking really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that, in short, the roots of all of my problems, as well as with most people's problems, are pride and fear.
Yes.
Whether you call it codependency, selfishness, ego, whatever you call it, self-righteous, false humility, whatever you want to call it, it all stems to those two things. And I realized that, like, if I was a gardener and I went out into my garden and there was weeds with all these leaves, and you give those leaves a name, call it codependency, resentments, malice, lust, sloth, whatever you want to call it, whatever you got going on up there as a defective character.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's my pride and backed by the fear of not getting what I want.
Mm.
Right? That prideful statement, I want what I want when I want it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's backing that action is because if I'm afraid that if I don't do or try to control or try to do this, then I won't get what I want. So you can pull weeds all day long. You can pull those leaves, pull until the cows come home. But what's going to grow back? The weed is going to grow back because I didn't pull it by the root.
Oh.
I needed to address what pride, how am I prideful? How am I fearful? What caused those things in me to be fearful?
Mm-hmm.
I had to look at all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I had a litany of lists when I first started this whole thing of certain fears that my kindergarten teacher instilled into me, because that's the truth. That's where it all began. That's the foundation. And then my own perfectionism, my own criticalness, my own codependency, my own pride.
Yes.
And I had to look at that deeper and through truth. Bible says pride goes before the fall.
Yes.
That means my sinful nature. So if pride goes before every sin, a lie goes before every sin too, because I'm justifying my sin. So therefore I'm a liar.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, if pride goes before every sin, then what backs that pride has to be fear because of not getting what I want. Mm-hmm. Then I looked at the first beatitude. The first beatitude is about humility, which is the opposite of pride. Mm-hmm. So I said, this whole thing, if I am to attain humility, or in this case, learn of it, learn of humility, then the issue that I have to be dealing with is pride.
Yes.
Because it's the opposite of the very first beatitude.
Yes.
So I cannot achieve any of the other virtues in life if I cannot be humble first. So in humility and love are so closely intertwined with one another.
It's true. Yeah.
Just as well as pride and fear on the opposite end.
Right.
So what I said, this whole exercise of these 12 steps is a movement from a fearful, prideful person to a person of humility, which is a beautiful thing, and which resounds to me in Matthew 28 through 30 when he says, "Learn of me, for I am meek and humble of heart." He doesn't ask me to be prudent. He doesn't ask me to be this. He doesn't ask me to be that. He doesn't ask me to be anything other than to learn of him to be meek and
humble. Beautiful.
And,
that's good.
Right. And so I further looked into denial. What is denial? Denial is pride. I'm denying the truth. So therefore, I'm putting my pride first. I'm putting me first. So I said, well, Jesus also said, deny yourself, pick up your daily crosses and follow me. But he also said, if you choose.
Follow.
If is a important word in the Bible to me because it denotes choice. If. So if I deny myself, so what am I denying myself from? I need to know that. That's why these 12 steps of recovery through Celebrate Recovery or any of the other 12-step processes will ultimately take you there, is for God to show, God is showing me.
Yes.
And if I'm honest and true, if what I write down on paper is true, because at that moment it becomes real.
Yes.
Right.
It becomes tangible. It's something that I can see other than just mentally.
Mhm. And now you have handed over control, the control that you seeked or you wanted. You have given God that control, which is one of the hardest things to do with many
Just not for people not just for people in recovery, just people in general.
in general.
I mean, that's why I always say we in my church, it's always, this whole 12-step stuff is called a general examination.
Mm,
It's taking a hard look over your life,
that's right.
from the past until this very moment.
Yes.
And it comes down to time.
Mhm.
And time is so precious, and that I have to make that time
Yes.
with God to know these things.
Yeah.
That's why these 12 steps are great, because they breaks it down into 12 steps where now you're taking that time and spending it with him for him to show you. And he's showing you the areas that I need to go to him for.
That's right.
And in areas that I'm still weak, where now he wants me to be strong.
Mm.
and use my testimony or my recovery, that what he has so freely given to me, I can freely give to somebody else
That's right.
in their journey with him, and to enlighten them to the truth. And that's why when I realized how significant that age-old millennial battle from all of ages between pride and humility, how important that battle is. And when I realized that, and when I sponsor or lead men's groups, I said it took me 3 years to figure that out.
Mm.
It took me 50 years to get to this point. If I'm going to help somebody, I'm going to give them the starting point to always look to your pride. Always look to those underlying fears and to know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because that gives you a starting point where you're sitting there like the road runner and your feet are just going, and they're going a mile a minute, but you're going nowhere.
That's true.
At least this at least gives you a starting point to put the puzzle together, and let God help you put that together. He's going to show you.
And getting from what you're saying, Scott, is that you have to recognize it and you start for you. Mm-hmm. Because I guess at this time, you had to separate yourself from your spouse in order to look after Scott and to move forward. Mm-hmm. So when Scott was strong enough, mm-hmm. then whether you have the choice to help her or make a decision to go your separate ways.
There's that fine line. I didn't walk over it. I took a jumping leap.
Yes.
And so I ultimately told my wife, I said, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. Well, I said, I have to do this for me. And right. I had to look to my own well-being. But I also learned that, when I was codependent and I was also trying to control things, I was very good at taking the finger and pointing it at you, saying you need to do this and you need to do that, where I have no control over what somebody else does.
That's right.
And I had to learn that telling somebody to do something is not the right way to do it, but to offer suggestions.
Yes.
Maybe look at it this way, or maybe as a suggestion, maybe try something this way. Ultimately, when that question of control that you asked is one of the very first questions in the Celebrate Recovery Step 1 process, question is what do you have control over? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question is I have control over nothing.
That's right.
Not a thing.
That's right.
So, in which, in the looking at what what that is I have to realize my nothingness in all of that, and realizing that I have control over nothing in this life. I have no control over the day, the time. I have the person. I cannot control anything. I can make a decision, but I don't have control. And when I realized that and came to grips with that, my life got a lot easier. So instead of trying to always control something, always trying to be, sacrificing for something, or always trying to get what I want, instead of just stepping back and saying and accepting this is what it is. I had to learn through recovery that the past is the past, and tomorrow is tomorrow. Tomorrow hasn't even come yet. I just have to worry about today.
That's right.
God will take care of tomorrow, but I just need to take care of today and live that one moment at a time.
Yes.
And that's why the Serenity Prayer, the full version of the Serenity Prayer, is so powerful. And the movement of that prayer from that battle between pride and humility is just reeks within that prayer. And I have to be willing to, as I go through my journey with Christ, I have to learn that there's certain things that I need to be able to deny myself. Those things that cause harm or offend or him or others. And it's being able to look at those things through the examinations. And ultimately, when I did the examinations, the first time I was like, oh, brother, this is pretty deep stuff, Ultimately, in my perceptions, a lot of this all comes down to perception of thought and what I perceive or think. So at first, it's all negative. You think negative, and look at all these negative things, and there's good. There's always good. There are people, I do good. Everybody does good. You just have to be able to see it.
Yes.
But if I were to ask somebody, write down 10 good things that you've done and write down 10 bad things that you've done, they would have the 10 bad things done in about 10 seconds.
Oh, yes.
They would have to think real hard about the 10 good things that they've done, because we're always focused on negativity.
Yes.
But what I realized that through doing this self-examination, that it is an exercise in getting to know yourself, but ultimately it's mercy.
Yes.
God loves me so much that he shows me in pen and paper who I am.
That's right.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it should be embraced. Yeah. And that's what a lot of problems I feel, even I've done the same thing too, is with, once I get to know myself, instead of those defects that I would run away from, instead of running away, embrace them.
Yes.
Because a lot of those defects are from my childhood, and it's the child inside of me that is wanting to revert back to those old man ways. And I have to tell myself, I have to tell the child in me, hey, it's okay. I got this. We don't have to go there. Don't worry, I got you. You're fine. You're going to be okay. And once I can do that and I can embrace that, then I know that God's working in me and the healing is there. And he's blessed me ever since, from beginning of time. But I have to be able to see those things. I have to see things in a different way. And I had one thing was my counselor told me one time, the first time that I finally got it, which was the last time, was he said, step one, he goes, is you realize that you're powerless over your addiction and your life is unmanageable. And I said, geez, he goes, why is that? You know, and we were always taught, oh, it's the drugs, it's the alcohol, it's this, it's that, you know, mostly, you know, the drugs and the alcohol. He goes, no. He goes, it's the way you think.
Mm.
And that was a huge red flag. And then I said, oh, it's how you think. So then I was like, I got to change the way that I think.
Mm.
And so, and when I look through the Bible, it's always, you know, learn of me, learn this, learn that, right? Um, so it was always with Jesus, the great teacher, always teaching. I had to be willing to rethink, relearn, and apply.
Yes.
And I had to employ that and apply that into my life. I had to learn not to control. I had to learn to give it to God,
Yes.
that God goes before me in all things. I had to retrain my brain with the way, the truth, and the life. I
Mm.
had to want to be willing to learn and apply and do instead of just existing.
It has been a journey for you, and it's a lot that you have to teach others about the pathway that you have been through. And I'm happy that Christ is in the midst of everything